Oh, always hit that when I hit that recording in progress. It turns off my PowerPoint. Okay, so yes, welcome September. I love fall too. It's my favorite season, so I'm excited. But then my allergies hit me, and I'm not so excited anymore. Today, I'm going to be talking about family therapy and dynamics. So just kind of an overview and giving you some of the tips and techniques on working with families, doing family therapy, kind of an overview of what it should look like. And then, some of the evidence-based practices that really go along with family therapy. When you're doing family therapy, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here because we all work with kids, and when you work with kids, you work with systems and you work with families, and that's the reality. But when you're looking at family therapy, you're looking at working with the entire family system. And when you do that, you have longer lasting effects than working with an individual. So when you're working with an individual, a lot of the times they're returning to that system. And so you're moving from more of a linear or an individual focus to a circular focus of the entire family. And the reality is that people have an influence on one another. And so when you're working with just that individual, you're doing a lot more work to try to build them up to go back into the system that has an influence on them. When you're working with a family system, you're working with the entire system together to make some of those changes. So again, just the individual versus family therapy. Individual is an individual concentration. It's more to help those individual needs of whatever they're struggling with, and kind of an existential approach, right? Like focuses on their makeup and who they are, what their existence is, and really exploring that. Where the family therapy focuses on the entire system. So the entire family system, and has more of a family focus, how one another impact each other, and focuses outside of self. So they still hit some of those individual pieces, but look at it from a family focus. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Family therapy is pretty interesting. It's not been around super long. So it actually originated from the 20s and the 30s from small groups in marriage counseling. So when they started doing like small groups and marriage counseling, they really started to see some of the dynamics that could fall in within family therapy. And then looking at, a child guidance movement with Freud and Adler, it pulled right into family therapy. But really, Don Jackson kind of led the focus of family therapy. He talked about homeostasis, so providing kind of that neutral space for families, just where they're chill, right? Like they've found this space where they can share with one another, enjoy one another, and interact with one another. And I mean, we all know that doesn't happen 24 hours with families, definitely not. Too many personalities, too many complex issues. But for the most, he talks about that homeostasis. Complementary and symmetrical relationships. So what this means is just those relationships that they can get along, right? Even ones who don't completely get along, they still can interact well with one another. So complementary of one another, and sometimes coming from different perspectives, but understanding and respecting each other's perspectives. And that's part of family therapy. And those symmetrical relationships, right? So we talk about, when we're looking at family therapy, we talk about hierarchy, and we talk about who's in hierarchy, who holds hierarchy, and keeping them within those systems. And so they function most when you hold that appropriate hierarchy, right? Like, so grandparents should be up top, and then parents, and then children. And so that's kind of the hierarchy in those relationships. And then, of course, rules, roles, and boundaries. Those are very much needed in family therapy. But Don Jackson really keyed the term scapegoat too. So identifying different roles that each family member takes. And a lot of the different therapy approaches look at family roles a little bit differently and can name them a little bit differently, but almost all of them have the scapegoat. So the scapegoat kind of was placed in there. But you have a lot of different roles within family, and it depends on the therapy approach that you take to identify those roles and work with them. When you're working with families, we talk about really going back to the basics, right? And so some of this seems so You know, a lot of the times when I teach about family therapy, they're like, okay, yeah, you know, these are interpersonal skills. We're all supposed to do that as therapists. We're supposed to know this when we're working with families, be warm and inviting. But that's really important when working with families, because if we're not warm and inviting, we're not really getting a buy-in with everybody. And we have to be able to identify and include everyone's perspective. So that's really important. Reminder calls is a big piece when working with family therapy. I thought this was interesting, but a lot of the times in books that I read and literature that I read, a lot discuss reminder calls and how important that is for families. But here's the reality if you think about it, like I have a really hard time, like our no-show policy is like 3 no-shows and then they go back on the waiting list. And I really have a hard time with families with that because they're complex. Families are super complex. They got a lot going on. A lot of the families that we work with have a lot of adverse childhood experiences and risk factors, right? Substance use disorder, abuse and neglect, poverty, mental health within the family system. And so a lot of the times they're very complex and they need some of those reminder calls. It's part of their mental health a little bit. And they're chaotic. Families are chaotic. Things are happening all the time. When you have little ones and you're walking out the door and they poop their pants, you got to change that. You got to take time and change that. And many of the times you're not going to be only 15 minutes late when that happens. And so really kind of understanding that with families. Being open and consistent is important. Again, we just talked about how chaotic family systems are. If they come in for therapy and for help, and we're chaotic or we're unorganized or we're inconsistent, then that's not going to be really helpful for them, right? It kind of only feeds into the problem. And so some of these things seem super basic, but they make such a major change when working with families. And empathy. So having empathy for understanding the family's systems, their beliefs, and respecting their beliefs are really important. Not all beliefs are going to be the same, but it's important to respect those. Engaging family systems. So when you're working with an entire family system, you have to build an alliance with each family member. And this is not an easy task to do all of the time. It takes a lot of time, and that's why family therapy can be really difficult. That's why it's really hard to find family therapy too, because it takes a lot. I know some of the barriers that we face in outpatient is, you know, when you open up under an individual and you're trying to build a relationship with each family member, you're meeting with them individually. And so you can't bill for that individual. So you almost have to open up under each family member. That becomes a barrier at times. But building an alliance with each family member is important. You want everyone to feel heard and everyone to feel like they have a say in this, or you're not going to move forward, especially if you don't join with whoever holds hierarchy, right? So you want to join with whoever holds hierarchy in the family first. So you want to quickly kind of gauge and identify that. And sometimes, I mean, we talked about the symmetrical relationships, but sometimes who holds hierarchy is not the parents or the grandparents. Sometimes it's the kids. So if you have a parentified child that kind of rules the roost, you have to join with that parentified child. And that can be really difficult at times, because here's the complication that comes about. If you don't join with whoever holds hierarchy, when you go into that system, they're going to make sure that you get out of that system. So if they don't trust you, then they're pushing you out. And kids have very creative ways of getting you out of that system, whether it's telling their parents they're not participating or shutting it down or being very disruptive during sessions, right? And so it's really important to make sure that we're engaging the entire system. Develop a hypothesis. And so we'll talk about throughout this hypothesis that you develop. And so you don't only develop it yourself, but you develop it with the family. So a hypothesis that kind of addresses the content and the process. And we'll talk about that. You want to build rapport again with each family member. Information gathering, gather information, take everyone's perspective, use their language. I use the family's language and their goals and our hypothesis and everything we do, because that's what's important to them. Emphasize with individuals and honor family beliefs, right? So if families believe in one way, it's really important to kind of honor that and in some of those beliefs. I know I did family therapy once with a family, and I had candy in my office. This was way before COVID, where you could put your hand in a candy bowl. But I had candy in my office, and I always had candy for the kids. And the grandparents were in hierarchy, and they were who who were raising these kids, and they had asked that we not provide sugar as a as an incentive or a reward for their sessions. And a lot of the times they say that they've gone places and people will be like, oh, well, it's just a piece of candy, it's just this, but that's their beliefs, right? And so I have to honor that and find a different way to kind of incentivize. And so taking that into consideration, I know that seems like something minor, but that could be something very big to them. This was a very big belief for their family, and there were reasons why, but we had to honor that from the beginning. And if we didn't, we probably would have lost the family. When we're engaging families, we also want to kind of assess and look at the stages of life that they're in. And there's a couple different stages of life. This is gladdings. But when you're looking at this, it kind of helps you identify like what the task is and some things that they might be going through at that time. So it's really helpful when I'm thinking about families and some of the stressors they might be going through, or as I'm trying to gather some of the information, taking into consideration what family life cycle they're in, so that I can quickly identify where some of those stressors could be influencing this whole content. So it's part of that process. But some of the life cycles, leaving home when there's a single adult, right? Because they're disconnecting from their one family unit and they're now creating their own, or figuring out how to create their own and exploring and how to connect and build those relationships. Joining families through partnerships. So again, there's a relationship, a dyad that occurs, and adjusting to that and kind of realigning with that and what that looks like for them, their friends, their family members. So that can be really difficult and that can be really stressful. I think of my son's totally in this stage right now, and I think of him as I'm talking about this, because he's totally trying to figure out, as we're making plans for something, and he's like, yeah, we can do that, we can totally do that. And then he stops and he's like, well, let me talk with it about, with my girlfriend about that. And I'm like, yeah. So you have to take a minute and kind of adjust, right? He's used to like living single and living that lifestyle. Families with young children, so accepting new members. You live in this dyad for a certain period of time. You adapt and adjust to one another, and then you introduce these new little lives who take a big time of your life. And so you want to be able to accept these new members and make room for them, and kind of realign again and join with one another in working together with this. Families with adolescents, this can be a really weird stage too, because adolescents are pulling for some individuation, but they still need that attachment, right? So you still need to attach with them and be involved. So you have to kind of realign and figure out this, like, how do we let them be little individuals and independent while still keeping an eye on them? And then you have this next level, right, where you have a lot of the times the elders in the family starting to need more attention. So healthcare issues or retirement issues, other issues that might be going on that can draw your attention too. And so then you're kind of stressed and pulled in different directions. And this is a part of life cycle, and it can be very overwhelming. Launching children, so this is when you have relationships exiting your life. A lot of the times this is when you're losing some more family members, through loss, through death, but also as they move out. And so it's a big stage of life. And then later life, so accepting and shifting to some of these generational roles and how others are acting and interacting, and how different the generations are, and adapting to that. And so all of this has a huge impact on the family system. And I want you guys, when you think about these life cycles, think about your own, just like I talked about my son, right? Think about your own and think about how stressful it is at these times, and then think about some of the families we work with and the extra stress they have. Like, holy cow, there's so much going on. And so you can understand why that family system has such an influence on one another. So when you're working with a system, we talked about rules, and boundaries. Structure is really important. Structure is important because, like we've talked about in early childhood, it helps kids feel safe, secure, and it's predictable, right? Structure is predictable. So it helps kind of reduce some of this chaos. When we can have structure come in, it reduces a whole lot of this chaos because it's more consistent. You work with the subsystems, so you're not only working with an individual, like we talked about, it's more of a circular approach. So you're working with the sibling subsystem, the parental subsystem, the grandparent subsystem. So whatever systems are involved is who you're working with. And when you're looking at it, you're creating roles, rules, and boundaries. So if you have individuals that are in a, parentified children and in the parental level, then you're starting to look at roles, like what are their roles and what are your roles as parents? What are some of the rules that go along with that? Rules help create boundaries. So helping structure some of those rules can be really helpful for that. Identifying those roles can be beneficial because then you can identify where the systems should be, how they're functioning now, and where they would like to see them functioning. And that's how you kind of work with families and looking at a lot of that. These are some of the techniques you can utilize to work with families. So this one here in the middle with the two circles has Mother Laura and Father. Mother Laura and Father, husband and other relationships. So these are structural maps. Structural maps are really beneficial to identify the structure, and you can see like the straight line is it's kind of a rigid boundary, and then the dashed line is an appropriate boundary. A dotted line can be an enmeshed boundary, and a lot of different therapies. There's tons of different literature on different types of structural approaches you can use, different kind of keys that you can use throughout these maps too. But whatever you're taught, like I was taught Minuchin, so I utilize that a whole lot. But this is a structural map, and it can be really helpful for just what I was saying, identifying, where the roles are in the family and then where you want them to be. So I actually sit down with families and we draw out structural maps and we talk about it, and we talk about what their roles are and what the parenting's like and who's in the system, who's not in the system, right? So the husband in this one is outside of the entire family system and has their own family system over here. But still involved with Laura. And so, Laura might be the child, a parentified child there. And so really looking at how some of that aligns with your approach and with your hypothesis. So you pull this into your hypothesis as well. This one over here to the right is an example of an eco map. Eco maps are really beneficial too. So you'll see they have the lines too. So they have the relationship lines. So they identify what types of relationships are in this. And so this is like a cutoff relationship, enmeshed, right? Like, or this key might be dotted. It might be just super tiny. It might be healthy relationships. But it kind of shows, and eco maps are so great to work with families, because a lot of the times they're like, well, nobody will help me, or there's nothing positive in our lives, like we have nothing really positive to support, or so you have the individual right in the middle, and then you kind of look at what all is involved and what kind of relationship they have with them, if it's a positive support or if it's a negative support. So like church, and so you see this go to the to the community level too. A lot of the times when you're working with families and you're creating goals, a lot of the times you come in under an individual, right? So they'll call and say, I'm having trouble with my kid and I think we need family therapy. And that's typically how I get people into the system. And so you have individual goal, family goal, community goal, really having that individual goal tie in with it. So for example, so the hypothesis might be that, the parents might say, I'm not really having a hard time with Johnny. His behaviors are just all over the place. He's super mean to his sisters, and he gets aggressive with us. He hits us, and we've had a lot going on, all of these things going on. And so my hypothesis could be working with the family, and with what they're telling me is, Johnny's behaviors have increased in aggression due to, recent losses in the family or due to whatever in the family. And so we process that, we pull it into a family goal as well. And so it's not only individual focus, but it's within the family system, right? If we reduce, so the hypothesis might be, if we reduce Johnny's aggression, he would increase positive interaction with his siblings, right? Which would reduce stress within the parents. And so that might be something that's common that happens. So the parents talking about all of their stress. And so we're talking about ways to kind of help alleviate some of that stress through content. That's the content, but the process is how it's linked to the family. And so his behaviors are the content, right? That's like anytime you're focusing just on behaviors, it's kind of, the behaviors are driven from something within the family system. And so you want to pull that process in. And then down here, structural maps, this is a genogram. And so genograms are created also with different keys and identify family members. Squares are males, circles are females. This little line here are like twins. And so you can identify a lot of different themes and patterns within family generations, especially families with sexual abuse history. Like, it's amazing to see how families have such a strong, I've had families that have had sexual abuse go back. You should do genograms at least 3 generations, right? But I've had them start to talk about when they see this picture of genograms and they see how prevalent that sexual abuse was, it's like enlightening to them. Even though you can hear it right away as a theme, sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, it was like all around me, right? And so it really helps you identify that. We talk about physical abuse, sexual abuse. We talk about medical histories, substance use disorder, mental health. And so we look for some of those themes within those genograms. And it really helps. These are tools that really help you not only kind of assess the family situation, but they're great tools to open up communication and discussion within the families and join with them. A lot of these tools I give to the families too. Many will ask for them. The structural map I always give to them because we're moving from one structure to the other. So I want them to have a visual of the structure that they've identified they want to move towards. But again, making sure that we're including them within that. So early in treatment, we identify conflicts that might be going on within the family system, which is usually the first thing they start talking about, so that's okay. A lot of the times, other conflicts that they're a little embarrassed of or not quite sure of sharing will start to surface later, but usually it's the behaviors or conflicts within kids that kind of come out first. And we structure around that presenting problem, but we reiterate that hypothesis that I had told you guys kind of links us to the whole family system. And so we look at that content versus process. So we develop the hypothesis around the presenting problem. So maybe it's the aggression in the family or the lying or the stealing or whatever is the presenting problem that they might pick up from the child, but we link it to that whole structure. Like, how is this linked to the family structure? What's going on within that family system that might be saying that? Sometimes we talk about, if you take away that behavior, what would it look like? And helping families kind of identify like what is going on within the system. Assigning homework on the presenting problem, how to manage things. So we do take a little bit of a behavioral approach and some individual approach initially to kind of gain some trust. And then we do activities so that they can gain perspectives of everybody, right? We explore the family, the function, how well they do. There's so many different activities. I know our MDT team always did the fishbowl activity of, if you were looking in at the fishbowl, where would everyone be? We've done family sculpting, so kind of sculpting what everybody looks like in the family. Each member would take a turn and get to see that. We've done charades, so family therapy charades, right? You pick out who somebody else is and you act them out, right? And this is really great for awareness. Some parents are like, I don't act like that, and kids are like, yeah, that's how we perceive it, right? I've done like a castle activity, so like a land of their own, so they live in this castle and this kingdom, and they can create the kingdom. Who's going to live in there? How are you going to make money? Who's going to work? Who's going to be in charge? And so really watching them work together can be beneficial, and seeing who they include, who they don't include, having discussions around that. So a lot of different activities to help with family therapy. I think I might not have saved the one with the video. So when you get into the thick of it, families, you want to start challenging some resistance. This is where you can, I'm just going to exit out for a minute because I don't think I saved. Oh yeah, it's in the next one. Okay. So when you're in the thick of it, you want to challenge any type of resistance that you might have from a family member. Use empathy to reduce any type of defenses, right? And so a lot of the times, especially when you do challenge some of the resistance, or you start to pull out some difficult factors, or others bring up difficult factors, you get a lot of defenses. So I think that's what can make family therapy a little bit scary, because families can get into it. But use empathy and kind of empathize with what the emotion might be around that, and bringing the importance of working through those things. From crisis comes change. So usually, you know, crisis can be a scary thing in families. And when you're doing family therapy and when they're going through a crisis, families can make, you know, everybody values things differently. And so families can make a very big deal out of something very small. And sometimes people feel like they have to fix it. But the reality is we have to let them struggle through it a little bit sometimes, because from that comes change, their ability to want to change and make a change and move forward. Unfortunately, sometimes families have to go through a very difficult crisis in order to make some of those changes, or be at the point where they want to make those changes. And so a lot of the times we come in at very sensitive moments in their lives. Sometimes we come in at preventative moments. So I kind of get a mixture of both. People who just want to be preventative, or people who are really going through a whole lot. There's been times where I've had to, it's become so aggressive and strenuous in family therapy that I've had to discontinue family therapy, right? If families were not able to not take this home, or, you know, we set ground rules, or they're not able to follow the ground rules or respect one another, then, you know, we can't have that in there. We need everyone to feel safe. Moving away from being directive as a therapist, and kind of allowing the family to develop their own patterns from this. So we're guiding and facilitating, kind of just like group therapy, right? You're just kind of facilitating them to take direction and move towards it and problem solve together, and working on that presenting problem. Work with the subsystems so that you relate their purpose. Don't substitute a role. So this is really important for family therapists, is to not substitute a role, right? It can be very difficult when you're working with those different subsystems, right? So if you're being really empathetic and listening, right, with maybe you're working with, maybe the biggest piece is like with the couples, and you're working initially with that unit, and you're meeting with mom and dad separately, and then you bring them together. If you become an empathetic listening space for them, it's going to be hard to kind of reunite them together as that firm foundation. And so you have to be very aware of yourself and your presence, and how you're managing that. If you become a trusted parent to one of the children, right? If you kind of let them go on and kind of complain, and just become that trusted person that is rescuing them, or taking care of them in session, or handling them, right? Then that kind of takes a role. And so that can be very difficult too. And so, you know, you become almost enmeshed with these families too. And so you have to be really careful with how much of a boundary you keep, and making sure that you're keeping the same boundary with everybody. And that can be really difficult. And so family therapy can be stressful in that sense. And a lot of the times it's a lot of work. And you know, I think that's why it's harder to find family therapists. Okay. So I'm going to play this. I don't know that I shared the, maybe not. I don't know that I shared the volume part. There we go. Can you guys hear it? What are we doing here? No.
Let's go.
Okay. Let me stop sharing and share again. Share sound. There we go. Oh, no.
What are we doing here?
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay, so this is a movie clip from Instant Family. I don't know if any of you have heard of Instant Family before, but I'll tell you a little bit about it after the clip.
I'm gonna be late for school, you know.
Come on.
Okay, so you're punishing me with manual labor. You know, I've worked harder than you've
Yeah,
ever.
yeah, I know. You're a badass, all right? This isn't a punishment, okay?
Hey, I'm Stuart. What's up?
Stuart, don't ever talk to her again, okay? As a matter of fact, go to lunch.
It's 8:15. Okay, lunch it is.
Come on. Put these on.
What?
Just put them on. Lizzie, I know you're angry. At us, at the world, maybe at yourself a little bit. I don't know, when you're not talking. Right? The truth is, when I'm pissed, I don't much like to talk about it either. But you know what I do like to do? I like to break shit.
Really?
Anything in this room. Swing away.
Okay.
Huh? How'd that feel?
Okay.
Feels good, huh?
Yeah.
I told you. I don't, whoa. Don't waste it, all right? I want you to do me a favor. I need you to think about something that really pisses you off. You got it?
Yeah, I got
Are
it.
you sure?
Yeah, I got it.
All right, let's see it. Bust that shit up. Yes! There you go. You like that?
Yeah,
Huh?
good.
All right, come on. There we go. Yes.
Oh, no shot.
You like that? That was cool.
So what did you guys think? What did you see in there? Anybody see anything that we're discussing? Anything stand out? Nobody?
Letting her aggression out and bonding.
Yeah, so absolutely. So he was giving her an avenue to let her aggression out, right? And they bonded. He did it with her. He didn't just stand there and watch her do it. He started doing it with her. Totally a bonding moment. You could see that as he's putting on the hat and the goggles. So they grew a little bit closer. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else anybody see? So this is a clip from Instant Family. And in this clip, so she got in trouble for something. He's a foster parent, and they adopted the 3 kids. Well, they eventually do, but they're fostering the 3 kids. And she's the oldest of the 3. She has a really difficult time letting her roll up as the parent. And so they butt heads a whole lot through this movie. And it's so interesting because they have tried every avenue until this, right? And he's like, listen, I know you're mad. I know you're mad at me. You're mad at, maybe yourself a little bit, right? So he just kind of named it, called it out. And then he gave her an avenue to allow that aggression to go out. No, not everybody can give those kind of avenues, but it's productive, and it was very productive for her. And she started to realize that he cares about her. Now, initially, he would not have done that because he was a new foster parent. He just didn't know what to do. So he probably would have tried talking to her and exploring with her, and that just was not working, right? So this is one of those patterns that we talk about, that you have to allow the families kind of take of their own. So you help facilitate to get there, and he did. He went to like a group therapy that helped him facilitate to get there. Like, you should try bonding with her, giving her an experience, right? And then this way they kind of showed how that happens. He took this and did it on his own. So you don't sometimes you can create homework where it's specific things, but it should be their specific things that they identify. And so this was a great example of how he took those patterns and constructed it to help her gain a coping strategy. And this was a pattern of interaction that was needed within this family. It's a great movie though. Yeah. So Dr. Swigert said it is a great movie. Like, I love this movie. I just added it today in this thing because I just watched it this weekend again because I just love it. So good. And then in family therapy, phasing out. So once the presenting problem starts to improve, you're phasing out, right? You're empowering these family members to function on their own. There's going to be minor reoccurrences. It's going to happen naturally. If you think of yourself, when you're having a hard time, when stresses are high, you go back to old behaviors. That happens within family systems as well. And so it's hard though, because family systems all are patterns of interaction. And when one goes back to an old pattern, a lot of the times the other ones will follow. And so you have to be aware of that as a family system and be ready to make some of those improvements and gain some of that awareness so that you can change some of those patterns of interaction. It's all about changing that and improving those relationships. A lot of the times you don't want those relationships to go by. So improving them are important. And then goodbye. We have goodbye rituals. So I used to do in-home family services, and we always had a goodbye ritual. Like we would do like bowling or something fun. And even now in outpatient, it is not uncommon for families to cancel on our goodbye ritual, which is super sad because I'm always looking forward to them. I usually have like all kind of like gifts or like certificates of completion for the families just to make them feel special. But sometimes families have a really difficult time saying goodbye or appropriately saying goodbye. And so many of the families we work with have had people just disappear out of their lives. And so we want to teach them that and how to appropriately say goodbye, using traditions, using events and things like that as something very important. Traditions is definitely one thing that we explore within the family system. What kind of traditions do they have around Thanksgiving or Easter or their holidays that they celebrate? And, I had one family that one time when I started with them, it was around Thanksgiving, and I started asking them about their traditions. And, nobody in the family could identify their traditions. They had a lot after we started exploring it, but they didn't identify it as traditions, right? And so we really had to label what traditions were and take a whole session and identify like what their family traditions were. And think about your own family traditions and how much enjoyment when you think about those, like you get out of just thinking about them, right? Like I get all excited just thinking about some of the family traditions. Well, sometimes they're not, right? Like sometimes it can cause problems. So really exploring with these families what their positive family traditions were, and sometimes they have caused problems. So we want to change those patterns of interaction so that it is something that they enjoy and that they identify and work with one another with. These are the different therapy approaches. So there's so many, right? So bone family systems, strategic family therapy, structural family therapy, experiential family therapy, psychoanalytic, and cognitive behavioral family therapy. All of them kind of come from some of those bases, right? Roles, boundaries, but from different angles. And getting that homeostasis. And so they all come from a little bit of a different angle with that, but some of the same congruent goals. And so it really depends on what your style is and exploring that. I didn't want to go too much into that because they all kind of have those core bases. But yeah, I think for me, I really focus on structural and strategic. I go into some psychoanalytic, especially with my new moms. I do a lot of that with because there's some generational trauma. So it really just depends on the population you work with and what your own techniques are and your own style of therapy. We tailor needs, and sometimes individual therapy goals are needed. So a lot of the times in family therapy, and this can be a struggle too, we know how easy it is to access care, right? But when we're doing family therapy, sometimes we need them to have their own individual therapy as well in a parallel process. And sometimes it's really hard to get aligned with family therapy. But it's important to kind of put that outside of yourself because it can create problems if you do that within yourself, and it can get sticky a lot of the times. Even with dyadic work, I work a lot with younger ones, and I include families all the time in dyadic work. And then, when I have ones that kind of age out, become 8 or 9, and they need their own individual therapy, I usually refer out because they're used to us working within that system. And when they're used to us working within that system, they have a certain trust with me. And a lot of the times they don't trust that I won't tell their parents. And at 8 and older, they're kind of starting to explore themselves a little bit more, and they don't want their parents to know certain things. So a lot of the times I have to refer out. So just being careful of some of those boundaries. Any questions? So that's all I have for that. Any questions or anything come to mind, comments?
I just love hearing about family work. I think it's so important. And I think you highlighted all the intricate challenges. And I just have to say, I sort of randomly came across that movie. And I just think that is the perfect example, especially with complicated kids, of all these interconnected goals and wishes and expectations. I love that you used that, because I found that movie to be really powerful, and it was just a really great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I love that movie too. It like brings all the feels out. Like I cry like 3 or 4 times, and not all sadness, right? Like it's like good things, and and yeah. Good movie.
Yes, thank you so much. That movie is excellent. For those who haven't watched it, it is really good. And I kind of want to like do what they just did. That looks really, really sane. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Thank you so much, Dr. Swagger, for that comment too.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We love your presentations, Amanda. That was really excellent. I only have one announcement though, and you'll get some time today back. The next will be on September 21st with Angelo Giolzetti, discussing how to support caregivers of elderly patients with neurocognitive disorders. So we look forward to seeing you then. I'll get those slides to everybody, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Amanda.